I'm Julian Hodges. I'm a gate builder, and this is Oakland, California. I'm going to demonstrate my interpretation of the quatrefoil. The quatrefoil is a four-leaf clover design that comes traditionally from Gothic tracery. As an example, this is actually a trefoil. That's 3 leaves. Traditionally, the trefoils and the quatrefoils, the four-leaf, are more of a frame. Typically in cathedral windows, they surround stained glass, so the motif is around the outside. These are called orbs, and these are cusps, and my focus has been to draw the cusps into the center of the composition and to have very small openings, making very intriguing sculptural compositions. This is an example. It's probably one of the larger ones I've done. This was used on a pair of entry gates on a small mansion, and so they needed to be rather formal. I also do rather delicate quatrefoil, and I'm going to demonstrate how this is done. These are twin-sided because they are approached from the front and the rear, so they need to be a mirrored effect. Basically, it's an XY grid with 4 holes that are very accurately located and cut in a very clean manner. And then the outline of the shape is done in black ink for high visibility. It's very important that the layout be extremely precise, so it's done with great care, and the other side is in exactly the same position, so they're a perfect pair, front and a back. I start to remove the material inside these orbs. The grain is going in this direction, so I make a cut in the center with this very small Japanese saw, and this is so I can come in from each side with the gouge and not rip out too much grain. So I'll do the same on the other side also with the grain. Then I'll do the cross grain cuts. So there's again a cut in the center. But I also need to protect the grain near the outside of the design so that I don't take out more than is desirable. And now I'm ready to start using the gouge. The gouge is very, very sharp. The reason for the line halfway through each of the orbs is if you exceed the center point, then the grain on the other side really wants to fly in the air, which is highly undesirable. So you need to be going into the center. If you hear that creamy cutting sound, that indicates that the gouge is very sharp. So these are now with the grain, slightly less vulnerable, but you still need to be careful. Okay. I think, well, one of my areas of interest in gate building is in the romance, and to have a large gate with very tiny fenestrations that just afford fleeting glimpses of what lies beyond the gate. They're very intriguing, and I've actually seen people with their eyes up against quatrefoils looking into gardens that I did the gates for. So that's the first part of the roughing out, and then we move on to rasping. And this is a circular, very sharp rasp, and I just start evening out. The stroke of the rasp is meant to average out so that you want to avoid dwell spots. On the widest part of the orb, the angle is fairly shallow, but as I go around the edge of the cusps, it becomes almost a vertical surface. So that's the actual sculptural intrigue of this shape, the way that plane changes. We're now going with the grain here, and it's easier for the rasp to bury itself between the rings, so it's necessary to make lateral sweeps to avoid that embedding. Then we have side 2, same process. It's very important in drilling the holes that they be very carefully done, going all the way through without blowing out the grain, so one has to be very tentative and very, very careful. And then back to the gouging again. So I use whatever size object that makes sense to wrap some of the sandpaper around. And this is to not only refine the shape, but to even out all of the surface as it changes its plane. I always start off with 120, and on something as delicate as this I go to 150 and then to 180. So now we're doing the 180, and we've got a pretty nice texture inside there. Most of the marks from the rasping are history, and we're very close to the ink line, and typically we more or less eliminate it in the final sanding. And that leaves the last rather delicate job of separating the cusps from each other. What I'm doing now is I'm making a mark on each side of the cut that I'll be able to see through the hole from the other side, and that's how I sight the cuts. So I'm going to sight the far end of the blade on one side of the cut, and then I'm going to sight it back here. That's the first cut. The Japanese saw is wonderful. I don't know how one could do this without it. That's the first cut. We now have 2 pairs of cusps. So this is the last part of creating the maquette, and that's the sanding, which is done very carefully and with the sander flat. This is a penetrating oil sealant that really brings out the drama of the grain. All of my gates are done in this oil. It gets done every 1 to 2 years, depending on the amount of solar exposure gates are exposed to.